I stopped at a home on my way here today and went into the trailer in Caledonia area. And the woman said, "Can I fix you a quesadilla and some rice?" So they always offer me something to eat, something to drink. And are just very generous with the little that they have. And have taught me a lot about living simply, about being faithful to their life's journey in the midst of all kinds of hardships and all kinds of difficulties and challenges, and especially those who are here without permission. Every day is a scary day for them. House moving, hooking them up, taking them down, cleaning their stalls, making sure they're fed. It's a lot of work. In Livingston County, the farms that I'm familiar with are all dairy farms. One is a calf management farm. So in western Monroe County, the migrant farmers are hired primarily for crops, especially the orchards for apples and other fruits. And then the main crops for the main other crops are cabbage, butternut squash, onions. Some of the farms have 2 12-hour shifts. The guys work for 12 hours. Some have 3 8-hour shifts. So there are always cows being milked 24 hours. So they finish one group and another group starts in. So I would imagine that also depends on how much they earn, not their hourly wage, but their total wage. I was talking to one young man who was working on a farm where they had 8-hour shifts, and he had 2 days a week off, and he loved it. Then he's from Puerto Rico, actually, so he doesn't have to worry about things like immigration. And then there are others who want to work 12 hours. They want to work 6 days a week because they're here to make money and to send it back home to support their families and get back home in time. So, the guy from Puerto Rico was just happy to do the 8 hours a day. That was enough for him 5 days a week, but not the Mexican folks. They really want to work and work and work. Yeah. Their work ethic is tremendous, I have to say. Mine's. And they don't last if they don't have a good work ethic. They're gone. From what I understand, I've never directly asked or have been told, but I understand that their wages do vary from place to place. Sometimes their housing is included, and so they might receive a lower salary or a lower wage per hour, but they have housing. And then others have their own housing, and so they might get less. I think they also, it might depend on how long they're working. Some of the farmers would give them an increase in wage as they get to know them and appreciate the work that they do. So, from what I know, they all get at least minimum wage, and some figures I have heard are more than that. So.
Places where farm workers have been coming to pick apples or pick cabbage every year for years, and they're really almost a part of the farmer's family. Very close relationships there. And then there's really horrible stories of farm workers who really mistreat. I've been in farm worker housing that has holes in the wall and non-working toilets, and no one's really. The New York State Department of Labor has to inspect all farm worker housing in the beginning of the season, so they can't. There has to be at some point when the housing's in decent condition, but in some farms there's no maintenance. There's no maintenance. about the farm workers. And Border Patrol was, for example, parking outside the church, the front door of the church. They were sort of circling around a festival that was being held outside. So it was sort of borderline harassment. And so now a lot of non-farm workers go to that church when there's a farm worker mass and either attend mass or just stand outside the church. And that has sort of kept Border Patrol away. Because we're 100 miles, within 100 miles of the border, there's an extra amount of security. Basically all of New York State is in that boundary. And so we just have a lot more agents than, say, Pennsylvania or North Carolina does. We're within a border. Even though the people who are here, most people who are here who are undocumented are here to pick produce. They're not here to cross the border. They're not here to take anything across the border. They're here to earn money to support their families back home. So. Also, there's situations where, like I know a farm worker who broke his leg. I know actually a couple instances where farm workers have been injured. One, the farmer was wonderful and allowed the man to stay in the housing. That's part of the job to recover, and it took him a couple months to recover. So that's a situation where there's a really good farmer who cares about his farm workers. Other farms would just say, sorry, you can't work, you got to go. And so they're left to sort of find someplace to live or try to get back to Mexico or Guatemala, where they've come from. Now farm workers are exempt from some labor laws. And so, for example, farm workers don't have the right to organize, to form a union in New York State right now, and it's not required that they be paid overtime. It's not required that they get a day of rest every week. And a few other provisions of labor law don't apply to farm workers. So
one thing we generally don't pay attention to is the large numbers of migrant workers who began coming to the Midwest in the early 20th century up to the present day. Most of those migrant workers in the first couple decades of the 20th century were actually Southern and Eastern European immigrants who had initially settled in urban centers and then were recruited to work in the sugar beet fields of Michigan as well as Indiana and Illinois for the first couple decades. And then after those migrant workers either permanently moved to industrial centers or were able to rise to the rank of family farmers, they were replaced by Mexican migrant workers during World War I and then continuing through the 1920s and the 1930s. Well, the Midwest is an interesting case because we tend to think about industrial agriculture, we tend to think of very large farms with hundreds of migrant workers. In the Midwest, the way that migrant labor developed was a bit of a different situation. You had most migrant workers working on what we consider to be family farms, so farms of 80, 90, 100 acres. They were brought in by the sugar beet companies to do what was very tedious, arduous, difficult labor that the farmers themselves didn't necessarily want to do. So in terms of how they impacted the local economy economically, it probably would not have been possible to have a thriving sugar beet industry in the Midwest without these thousands of migrant workers. So what you have then is an interesting combination of migrant workers and family farms, which kind of bucks the conventional understanding of migrant labor in the United States. It's more than just pay. Basically, the way that the planting season and the harvesting season runs, you need to have workers come in April and May and June and then come back periodically to weed throughout the summer months and then come back to harvest in the fall. And so what you find is you have migrant families who work on a number of different farms. And so the companies that are contracting with the farmers to grow this crop are the ones who are bringing in the migrant families, even though the farmers technically pay the migrant workers. So they recruited entire families because these families were going to be in Michigan for at least 6 months. So the thinking here is that they'll be peaceful, they'll keep to their own, they won't disrupt the communities, but they'll get the work done for as cheap as possible.
Dairy farmers have said to me that they have to go out of business if they didn't have Mexican workers because we can't get enough domestic workers, and they really appreciate the quality of work of the Mexican workers. It's pretty scientific. I mean, one of the farmers that I know is they just do calf management, which means taking care of the baby cows until they're old enough to be sold for veal, or the females are then moved to a dairy farm to start milking. So maybe until they're 4 months old, 6 months old, and they're fed very precisely. It has to be measured very precisely and administered very precisely. And so the guys pick it up really fast and do an excellent job with it. And they're willing to do all the cleaning that's involved, which is pretty dirty work, and it's not the kind of work I'm interested in doing. I know that, or that I don't know if physically I could do it either. 576 visa workers with them this year. And those workers do all the harvesting, especially butternut squash and cabbage, and the processing of it. They have their own processing plant right there, packaging, and they have cold storage there. So, and they keep workers, most of the workers till after Christmas, and then some stay through till April. The ones that are there toward, like in February, they're getting all the cabbage ready for St. Patrick's Day. So they have tried to get local workers. They have a huge farm, 75 visa workers plus some other folks who work and their own family members. And so, again, I wonder, they have had to prove that they couldn't get 75 domestic workers, right, if they bring these guys in. So what would happen to their business if they didn't have the migrant farm workers?
The federal level, of course, everyone knows it's the whole issue of illegal immigration and who's here and how do they get here and what are we going to do with them now that they're here. And so the Catholic Church is very much in favor of comprehensive immigration reform, which would deal with border security, for sure, because nations have a right to defend their borders, but very concerned about family reunification, because right now families are split, and we want to change the law so that families are able to be united. And that immigrants who have been here, whether they're farm workers or landscapers or maids or cooks or whatever, that if they've been here for a matter of years, some of them even own homes, some of them, if they've proven that they're going to be a productive member of society, they should be allowed to pursue citizenship. We're not saying they should be put in front of the line. There's people who have been waiting a long time to become citizens of the United States. We're just saying they should be allowed to get in the line and follow a path to become citizens.
The crops would rot in the fields. And you and I would be paying high prices or not having any butternut squash this Thanksgiving or cream for our coffee. Starbucks, they'd probably go out of business too.